Joining us now, NBC's Ken Dilanian and Ankush Khardori, senior writer at Politico magazine and former federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice. So, Ken, what does Bondi's experience tell us about how she could lead the Department of Justice?
Good morning, Jose. I think it's a mixed picture. So unlike Matt Gaetz, Pam Bondi is a real lawyer. She worked as a prosecutor for many years and then was attorney general of a major state for 8 years. So she knows about the rule of law. She knows how to run a large organization. And in some ways, she's going to govern the Justice Department, I would think, like a standard conservative administration. There's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of different positions, but that's sort of normal. But then you have this other element here, and what you just heard her talking about, the deep state, and bad prosecutors will be prosecuted. That really starts to suggest that she will, at least in part, pursue Donald Trump's agenda of retribution. And one can easily imagine a special counsel appointed to investigate the investigators, as happened in the first Trump administration with special counsel John Durham, and a lot of people having to hire lawyers and go through the agony of being investigated. At the end of the day, though, the FBI, the investigators, they can't manufacture crimes where none existed. And there's been not a scintilla of evidence of any wrongdoing by anyone on Jack Smith's team or really anyone else in terms of the investigations of Donald Trump. But nonetheless, it seems likely that she will pursue that agenda, Jose.
And Kush, you worked for the Justice Department under Presidents Obama and Trump. What are people in the DOJ saying about the possibility of Bondi coming in?
Well, look, I think everybody has breathed a sigh of relief after Matt Gaetz sort of was taken out of contention or removed himself. Look, I think Bondi, the profile is exactly as Ken described it. So I think people will at least take some comfort in the fact that she is a career prosecutor, she is a professional, she's a lawyer, she knows what she's doing, and particularly in the area of criminal cases. But I do think that there is a legitimate concern about some of these comments that have been raised, including about prosecuting the prosecutors and her willingness to indulge some of Trump's lies about the 2020 election. And so, we have talked about this actually a little bit when the Gaetz nomination was still pending. I tend to not just view the attorney general position as a box where someone has to just check the right boxes on a resume. This is such an important position. It requires, I think, senators and the public to assess the nominee's character, their temperament, their disposition, their ethical and moral compasses to the best that they can. And I don't mean to suggest that Bondi would fail that, but I do think there are going to be some serious questions about some of these comments at our confirmation hearing. And I hope that she has answers that will put some of the serious concerns to rest.
And Ken, NBC News has new reporting on how officials inside the Justice Department are reacting to Trump naming his defense attorney, Todd Blanche, as deputy attorney general. What'd you learn?
As strange as it sounds, the president's defense attorney becoming the deputy attorney general, which is the chief operating officer of the department, a lot of people we talk to are very relieved by this choice, simply because Todd Blanche was a line prosecutor at the Justice Department. People know him, and they know he's a serious lawyer, and they believe, based on the track record, that he has some ability to stand up to Donald Trump. Donald Trump's behavior as a client in these cases changed significantly when Todd Blanche became his lawyer. So there's a lot of favorability being directed at this nomination. And again, it's a crucial job. It's really running the nuts and bolts of the department. At the end of the day, we'll have to see. And there's certainly some worry that he's going to do some things that Donald Trump wants him to do that people won't like. But again, given his experience level, generally viewed positively inside the department.
And Ankush, you have a new piece out making the case for President Biden to commute or even, I guess, pardon, but at least not to pardon, but to commute any prison sentence for Hunter Biden. The president has repeatedly said he will not pardon or commute his son's sentences. What would a commutation look like, and why do you think the president should do it?
Well, so you're right. There's a distinction between a pardon and a commutation. This would not be, what I'm suggesting is not a pardon, meaning wiping the convictions clean. I'm proposing commuting any prison term that he may receive in connection with the sentences on these cases. The convictions would still stand, but he wouldn't necessarily he would not serve any prison time under my proposal. The reasoning is, I think, based on two key premises. One is that if you look closely at the two criminal cases brought against Biden, these are not cases that are usually pursued through criminal prosecutions. They're usually resolved through non-criminal means. And the second key premise is that, or factual premise even, there was a deal last summer in which all of these charges would be resolved without Hunter Biden having to go to prison. And Republicans balked. The presiding judge in Delaware, a Trump appointee, balked. And there was supposedly a dispute over how much immunity he would get. Everybody went back to the drawing board. He got charged with all these cases, but the gun case in Delaware, the tax case in LA, he's been charged with nothing else. So apparently he was correct that he deserved the immunity provision that he was asking for. But basically, you know, we have the situation where Trump may be going to the White House and he may be going to prison. And it seems very, very off and really ripe for some mercy, quite honestly, by the president.